Welcome to the Dragon's Den. I'm your venerable host Orochi, and today we are going to talk about the precarious little scamps known as Kobolds in the Pathfinder 2 universe. It's just going to be a light how to going over all of their feats and perhaps suggestions on the types of classes that these little things are good at. So when you first select Kobold, they're uncommon, but they're fully accessible in PFS if that's your kind of thing. So, and that sort of should tell you that, in general, they're good to go. They're not underpowered like they've always been in every edition of D&D, including 5th edition until very recently, I'm pretty sure. They're actually fun and interesting. And that makes me very happy because I think kobolds are extremely interesting little things, and they've always gotten a bad rap of just being evil and kill on sight and all this kind of garbage. This whole discussions on that sort of thing. And I'm generally of the opinion that most things in general should not be kill on sight. Everybody's just people, and so if any people are kill on sight, that's sort of speciesist. That's just how it is. It's like, it's fine if individuals, or even most of them in general, tend to be hostile towards you, then yeah, you defend yourself and all that stuff. But the whole idea of just, oh, well, these things are always evil, but they're all over the place. It's like, outer forces, demons, devils, those things, those are evil. They're made of evil. Outsiders, like aberrations, things from the far realm and stuff that we can't even contemplate what they are, and they almost always want to do us harm. Those things are evil. But just general people and cultures that live on the same planet, like, it doesn't make any sense that you could just brand them all as these are need to be killed by low level characters because that's how we need the game to go. It's like there's plenty of other things. There's plenty of unintelligent creatures that you can put in to fill that role. You don't need to be massacring intelligent creatures. That's all there is to it. So let's get into kobolds. Hit point 6. The whole thing of having racial hit points was a real cool thing at first, but now that I've played the game some, the fact that most have 6 or 8 and very few have 10, it's like, oh, that's supposed to make a big difference. It's like, it doesn't. It's such a non-issue past like level 1 that I really wish something more had been done with that. It's a cool design space to go like, oh, well, these things are a little bit weaker. It's like missing 2 hit points will almost never in your entire career matter. It'll matter at level 1 a couple times maybe. Level 2 very rarely matter. And after that, the damage numbers start getting so large that it's almost never going to matter 1 or 2 points. So, yeah, it's a non-hindrance. And the fact that they originally made feats that could buff that up and stuff shows that it's a cool design space that is just massively underutilized. Size small. This used to matter in previous editions of D&D and Pathfinder, but now it doesn't. This is just a roleplay mechanic, basically. Speed 25 feet. This is everybody almost. Ability boost, dexterity, charisma, and free. These are kind of some of the best abilities you can get. Charisma is all the best casters because they also double. You can also easily, exceptionally easy, double as your party face while being a caster, which is fantastic. It allows you to take on multiple roles. And dexterity is just good because most characters want it unless you're going to be in heavy armor. It'll be useful for you, especially if you're a caster. Ability flaw, though, is Constitution. That's one of the worst things to have a flaw in because you can't work around that. You need to eventually get 18 Constitution. So this just means that your kobold will always be 1 HP per level behind everybody else. Which is, you know, not bad at first. 1 point, 2 points, then 3 points. But, you get to level 10 and you're 10 points behind. It's like, that could matter. The way damage scaling, not so big a deal, but it still could matter. The languages generally don't. This is more like a cool suggestion on all of the races, that these are the languages that they're usually exposed to, so they can often learn. That's probably more. It's helpful to players, but it's more like a GM kind of thing. This might be giving you access to these things, but I think in general, your background should be more used for that than this. And dark vision, which is super useful, because you either have dark vision or you have normal vision. That's it. Like, low light vision is garbage. It boggles my mind how that is a thought process of usefulness. That there's 3 steps of vision modes, and the middle one is only a tiny bit better than the regular, where dark vision is just everything. You see everything all the time. Like, there's such a massive gap between low light and dark vision that it's kind of ridiculous. But that's kind of talk for another time. Draconic Exemplar, you have Draconic Influence, which is most of the time just flavorful, unless you take just 2 heritages you can take that actually make use of it. The rest of the time it's just going to be cool backstory kind of stuff that determines, hey, this is what color you are, probably. Which is awesome. I adore that kobolds have a lot of dragon flavor. They have since 3rd edition, and being how things are, of course, I love that. And there's a lot of talk on the forums and stuff, especially recently, of changing kobolds more than they already are, because the Galarian species need to differentiate themselves from D&D, and specifically, Taural races. And I'm not sure the Taural kobolds really have all that much going for them, other than in 3rd edition they were given, dragon flavor, and I haven't really seen too much more added since then. So I have seen some really cool videos that are 100% yes, that's what I think kobolds are. Very different from a lot of what a lot of other people think, apparently. Aside from cute bolds and swole bolds and all that weird stuff. But the fact that Paizo doesn't want to go like hog wild with draconic flavoring stuff, because that's apparently 5th edition, D&D's kind of thing, which I say is complete bullshit. They want to make things different than that, but then it's like, well, isn't the whole reason why they changed the design of kobolds to have more like squared heads? Their original thought process from what I read, what I remember reading anyway, was supposed to be that they look more like dragons. And I think they should have really, really run with that and just put like dragon heads on kobold bodies, and that would have been cool. And they could totally go in deeper with draconic flavor for kobolds. And honestly, even for the system at large, I don't see why it would be a problem to add in a lot more draconic flavor, because the only reason why D&D has more draconic flavor with Dragonborn and stuff, and having a lot of classes that have that sort of flavor, is because people like it. That's the only reason why it's there, is because there is a large section of fans who want that sort of thing. So why not give that to them? You can do it in a completely different way, but you can still do it. I think kobolds would be a good place for that. Make them look more like dragons, and that, doubles in on the fact that, and even maybe give them the dragon tag. Make them the smallest draconic creatures that there are. I think that would be really cool. But anyway, I don't think there's ever a reason not to add more draconic flavor, and that's probably not it. I know that there are people who are against that sort of thing, but it's pretty damn popular, so why wouldn't you want to capitalize on something popular? So for heritages, we're cave climber. You live in a vertically oriented home, and you are a consummate climber. You gain the combat climber skill feat, which means you can move around faster in combat, I believe. It makes a success a critical success, I think. Even if you don't meet the prerequisites, you can use your clawed feet and tail to climb, leaving your hands free, which is amazingly strong. Additionally, if you succeed at an athletics check to climb, you critically succeed instead. Okay. I don't remember what combat climber specifically does. It might just add an extra 5 feet automatically when you get a success or better. But not having to use your hands while climbing is amazing, because then you could just use weapons. Like, you can use a ranged weapon while climbing. That alone, in Pathfinder 2, they have this whole thing where, you can't fly until you're mid to late teens at best. Like, level 13 is the earliest, anything. Well, Strix get it pretty early, I think. But besides that, dragons can get it at 13. But that's third party, so you might not consider that, even though it was done by the core designer of Pathfinder 2. Most everyone else can get it at 14, between 14 and 17. So you can't get flying until late levels, and the reason for that is because it's too powerful in combat, which I flat out deny. I don't think it is. The fact that you have to spend an action every turn just to keep flying, and that you can't step or move properly while flying, it's just move speed, so you're always triggering, are two enormous downsides to flying. So I don't think it should require such catastrophically high levels for it. But you could just do this. Literally find any surface, vertical surface, a rock, a tree, a wall, anything, and climb 10 feet up it with a ranged weapon, and suddenly you're basically flying. People can't reach you with their melee, and you're shooting them. It's the same thing. Only with climbing, you don't even need to spend an action to stay there. You're just in the middle of climbing. You're safe. So there's certain options that make other things look ridiculous. And that's why I say this is crazy, stupid good, because if you can figure out how to use this properly, it's basically low-level fly, only slightly better. You can't move around freely, but if you're if you're a spellcaster or a ranged combatant, just climb up a tree, climb up a rock, climb up a wall. There's so many options to make it crazy powerful. Then we got Cavern Kobold. You hash into a warren among narrow tunnels and countless kin. Your body is flexible. When climbing rock walls, stalactites, or other natural stone features, you move at half your speed on a success or at full speed on a critical success. And you move at full speed on a success if you have quick climb. That's so specific to things, but it is faster. I kind of have a problem that we have Cave Climber and Cavern Kobolds. They're so similar that Cave Climber is really powerful, so I'm not sure I can just quite say you should combine the two of these, but having one just be the Speed Climber and one being the assured Climber, I guess it's sort of different enough, but really that sort of differentiation in this game is way too like niche for me, for my tastes. Because if it's not something you can make a lot of use out of, then it's not a good option. This doesn't affect you if you're using a climb speed. If you roll a success on an acrobatics check to squeeze, you get a critical success instead. So it's got some cool stuff in it. It's you can move up to half your speed on a success and full speed on a critical success if you don't have a climb speed. So you can sort of vaguely mimic having a climb speed. But with this, you 100% need to really invest in climbing, whereas Cave Climber, you don't need to invest so much into climbing. You just need to be able to succeed at basic climbing stuff to get up like 10 feet and you're good. Squeezing is helpful, rarely, but when you can do it, it's super cool. So it's sort of a ribbon, but it's really cool when it does show up. And then Dragon Scale. Your scales are especially colorful, possessing some of the same resistance a dragon possesses. You gain resistance equal to half your level, minimum of 1, to the damage type associated with your draconic exemplar. Double this resistance against dragon's breath weapons. Basic half-level resist to something with an extra rider of double against dragons, which is pretty interesting. Like, you could kind of say that, oh yeah, I worked for a dragon who got angry all the time and had a tendency to use his breath weapon on us every once in a great while. So I kind of built up a good resistance to that. That works for a cool backstory. And then Spell Scale. A trace of draconic magic flows through your veins. Choose one cantrip from the arcane spell list. You can cast this spell as an arcane innate spell at will. A cantrip is heightened to half your level rounded up. You gain the proficiency rank in arcane spell attack rolls and spell DCs, and your key casting ability is Charisma. That's cool-ish at level 1 until like level 7, I think, maybe 8. Once spellcasters go up to expert, then you're just always going to be behind and your cantrip is going to be worthless. So choose a cool effect cantrip and not a damage one after that, if you plan on going that high in levels, I guess, because you're just going to fall so far behind in proficiency that it will be irrelevant all the time. Cantrip damage, I think, past like level 3 just goes straight into the trash. It's like, if you're using a cantrip for damage past like I would say past level 5, you could maybe get away with it at 3 and 4, but like level 5 and above, if you're using a cantrip for damage, then you're not really helping your team out. Your damage is so far below what other characters can do, unless you're in a low damage party. Like, that's always an option, and that's one of the things that's great about Pathfinder too, is you could easily build, a fun, happy-go-lucky, comedic relief kind of party that has low damage, and your GM can just scale stuff to your level. But if you're in a group that is geared up towards getting through APs, which APs tend to be freaking difficult, then doing this kind of thing is just going to be detrimental. It'll never be worth the action cost to use an under proficiency cantrip for damage. especially an attack cantrip. It would be terrible. Just a massive waste of your time and your party's time. Strongjaw Kobold. Your bloodline is noted for their powerful jaws and sharp teeth. You gain a Jaws unarmed attack that deals 1d6 piercing damage. Your jaws are in the brawling group and have the finesse and unarmed traits. Finesse is cool for jaws. Usually finesse is reserved for claw attacks at best. So that's kind of cool. 1d6 damage is pretty terrible, but you are a tiny little kobold. I sort of wish there was more stuff to do with this later on, because otherwise it's just not a fantastic option. Because the damage is low, you don't really get anything cool with it. Like, I don't know. If you're like an archer or whatever, as a kobold, and you just need a freehand finesse weapon, then this is fine. You know, it's fine. I always love that idea of taking a natural weapon that is especially a bite, so that you can use both of your hands for your ranged attacks, or a gun, and you can still do melee by biting people. So you're never at a disadvantage that other characters would be. I like that quite a bit. You could say that regular people can just do a 1d4 kick or whatever, but I think the base damage in this game for unarmed attacks is way too high. I find it hilarious that in 5th edition you do 1 damage with an unarmed attack in a game that's all about making your dice useless, because you need to pick up dice from other places, so your weapon damage die rarely matters because you're trying to pick up so many other sources of damage. Whereas Pathfinder 2 allows your base damage of that weapon to scale up in an amazing way. So giving the lowest damage a D4 is way, way too high, because it makes D6 weapons look stupid. Like, you're comparing a dagger as a D4 to somebody punching you. It's like, one of those is going to hurt some, where the other could kill you. Like, it's... And then you check a short sword, a D6, versus, somebody punching you as a D4. And sure, these bladed weapons are lethal, and that's the difference between not killing you and killing you, but because of the way this game works, if you get knocked unconscious, which any of these weapons could do, then all of them can easily kill you. So I really hate that the lowest damage is D4. I would say if it was, the two of them should swap. 5th edition should use D4s for its low damage, and Pathfinder 2 should have 1 point of damage for their unarmed, and then have it scale up to 4 points of damage when you get greater striking. That makes a lot of sense to me and actually makes real weapons feel better. But I don't know. I just think unarmed attacks, specifically racial special attacks, need a lot of love in this game, because they're so cool and thematic, and it's hard to build a non-monk character around doing damage with your just natural weapons. Tunnel Flood Kobold. You grew up in a warren crisscrossed by underwater passages, whether natural or excavated. You might have made them yourself, which is cool. You get a swim speed of 15 feet. That's decent. It's not really fantastic at all. It's all right. Venom Tail Kobold. A vestigial spur in your tail secretes a dose of deadly venom each day. You gain the tail toxin action. My only problem with this makes you more of a wyvern kobold, which is kind of weird to me. I sort of fall into that group where I don't think wyverns are true dragons, that whole spiel. But If you were playing in a less magic, more realistic setting, then yes, dragons would only have 4 limbs because 6 limbs is ridiculous. It's freaking stupid. But it's cool in a magic setting because it's like, oh yeah, they've got 6 limbs because they're magical freaking creations. That's awesome. So, yeah. Then we shall go down to our first ancestry feat. Here's a great one. Cringe reaction. The trigger is a creature you are aware of critically succeeds on a strike against you and would deal damage to you. With pitiful posturing, you cause your foe to pull back a deadly attack. The attacking creature takes a circumstance penalty to the damage of the triggering strike equal to your level +2. This penalty applies after doubling the damage for a critical hit. The attacker is then immune to your cringe for 24 hours. Super, super flavorful, but I think 5th edition has a much better one because it's like an AoE that demoralizes enemies around you. What is it? Cringe, cower, and beg or something like that. I used that once in a game to massive effect, and I was like, wow, that's actually cool. I can just AoE debuff the enemies. Whereas this is kind of like, you can only do it once to a single enemy, and they have to critically hit you, which is bad for you because, A, you're a kobold. You have less health than everybody else because you're 6H racial HD and because of your constitution penalty. So you've got less health than everybody else, and it only works on a crit. And the damage reduction is basically the same as what a champion can give out. It's a circumstance penalty to damage, so I think it would stack with a champion's resistance because they just give resist, and this is just a penalty to damage. So yeah, those two things would stack, so that'd be cool. You could get twice your level +4 in damage resist to a crit, but it's a crit. It's gonna wreck you anyhow. So I kind of feel like, as with many things, my general opinion of most abilities in Pathfinder 2 are undertuned. They aren't nearly as cool as they could be. If this is only going to work once for a creature, like, make that much bigger. Or make it have some other ribbon ability or something. I don't know. But it is a cool thematic thing. And also, one of the great things about Pathfinder 2 is, like, if you're a GM and you really like this thing, then just bump up the numbers a little bit. Like, make your players feel awesome. That it should be one of the primary goals of playing this game. Draconic Sycophant. You have an effect that dragonkind find unusually pleasing, and when that fails, you know when to duck. You gain a plus circumstance bonus to perception checks and saving throws against dragons. In addition, whenever you meet a creature with the dragon trait in a social situation, you can attempt a diplomacy check to make an impression on that creature immediately, rather than after a conversing for 1 minute. You take a -5 penalty to this check. If you fail, you can choose to engage in 1 minute of conversation and then attempt a new check rather than accept the failure or critical failure result. Special, if you have the Glad Hand skill feat, you don't take the penalty to your immediate diplomacy check if the target has the dragon trait. So, the big problem I have with this, it is super amazingly flavorful. The perception checks and saving throws is fantastic. The problem with it says meet a dragon in a social situation. How fucking often is that going to happen? How often are you going to meet a dragon in a social situation? And the answer is it 100% depends on your GM. If you walk into the dragon's lair by yourself, getting through past whatever traps or whatever, but if you as a kobold, as a draconic sycophant kobold, manage to walk up to a dragon and they aren't in a bad mood and just kill you, then I would say, yeah, that's a social situation, because they're going to be like, you have 5 seconds to explain yourself before I kill you. And you'd be like, okay, but hear me out. That's a social situation. Like, engaging before combat is a social situation. It's not your everyday kind of social situation, but I would think GMs should give you that leniency, especially if you show yourself alone or whatever. But because otherwise, that's never going to happen. Literally will never friggin' happen unless you meet a good dragon who has been scouting you out and wants to talk to you already. But then you're probably already going to have a good reputation with them. Instead of, the whole point of this is trying to calm down a dragon who's probably about to crush you. So this is super flavorful, and with a lenient GM, it is amazingly powerful feat. Being able to talk down a dragon if you roll well enough, or if you build slightly for it, and +2 to circumstance for perception and saving throws, always fantastic. So that's a really good feat. Unless you never come across any dragons, then it kind of sucks. But you're kobold, so you should hope to run into a dragon at some point. Dragon's presence. As a member of dragonkind, you project unflappable confidence that collapses catastrophically against the deadliest foes. When you roll a success on a saving throw against a fear effect, you get a critical success instead. When you roll a failure against a fear effect, you get a critical failure instead. In addition, when you attempt to demoralize a foe of your level or lower, you gain a +1 circumstance bonus to the intimidation check. This is just cool. It's just like, yeah, you are an overconfident, you think you're a dragon, you have overconfidence, but as soon as somebody pushes back against it, you just crumple because you're just a tiny little kobold. I love that feat. It's super cool. It might be dangerous. It's also risky as fuck too. Like, you better make sure that whatever class you're taking, you max out your will saves, because otherwise you're gonna be in trouble. Kobold Breath. You channel your Draconic Exemplar's power into a gout of energy that manifests as a 30-foot line or a 15-foot cone, dealing 1d4 damage. Each creature in the area must attempt a basic saving throw against the higher of your class DC or spell DC. You can't use this ability again for 1d4 rounds. At 3rd level and every 2 levels thereafter, the damage increases by 1d4. The shape of the breath and damage type and saving throw are determined by your Draconic Exemplar. And this ability is the trait of the type of damage it deals. Super cool having a fire breath, but this scales up in the exact same way that cantrips do. And as I just mentioned moments ago, cantrips are terrible. Not bad, fucking terrible. Their damage is so low that it could easily become a non-issue in most games. If you have any damage dealers, like people who have actually built their characters to deal real damage, any fucking barbarian, any of the good barbarians, giant dragon or animal, the rest of them do much less damage for no reason, as far as I can tell. They don't give enough bonuses, whatever. But a good barbarian or a well-built fighter will just make you look terrible, because they're going to be doing like 4 to 5 times the amount of damage you are to a single target, killing it faster and moving on to the next one where you're just scratching things. And you'd have to do this multiple times for it to even have any change the amount of time to kill a target. Like, a lot of AoE abilities in this game, I think, are only good if you have an entire team that specializes in them, so that you can wipe everything out at the same pace. Because mixing AoE damage and single target damage doesn't really work, because the single target is always so much higher. But I went all over that sort of stuff in my problems with spellcasters, but it'll always be a problem. because of the way these things are based. And you can only do it once every 1d4 rounds. Often that's going to be once per combat. So this damage it's not worth it. Super cool ability, not worth it. And we'll get into the other feats that buff it up some later, and that'll change the opinion slightly, but we'll get there. Kobold lore. Pretty much every species has their own lore, which is cool. You attentively learn key kobold survival strategies and mythology from your elders. You gain the trained proficiency rank in stealth and trick thievery. If you would automatically become trained in those skills, you can become trained in something else. You also become trained in kobold lore. Those are common everywhere. Kobold weapon familiarity. You've trained in the weapons ideal for subterranean efficiency. You are trained with the crossbow, great pick, light pick, and spear. You also gain access to all uncommon kobold weapons. For the purpose of determining your proficiency, martial kobold weapons are simple weapons, and advanced kobold weapons are martial weapons. This is a super interesting sounding feat, but it doesn't really do anything. I mean, it sort of has scaling proficiency, but not really. It's... you just become trained. It doesn't actually scale. And it allows somebody with lower proficiency tier to use higher proficiency tier weapons. You can use martial weapons as simple, but that's not really helping you if you can't hit anything with them because your proficiency sucks. Yeah, I think almost all the racial weapon familiarity feats are pretty terrible because they, from first level to fourth level, they convince you that, hey, I'm a spellcaster, but I could also use a melee weapon. This is cool. But then after level 5, you don't gain proficiency bumps that keep up with martials, and you also don't have any striker abilities to actually up your martial damage, so it becomes a waste of actions, and it's lots of feel bad. Scamper. You are adjacent to at least one enemy. You instinctually know how to flee danger. You stride up to your speed with a +5 status bonus to your speed and gain a +2 circumstance bonus to AC against reaction triggered by this movement. You must end this movement in a space that's not adjacent to any enemy. This is alright. I think the circumstance bonus to AC could be higher, or just not trigger reactions at all would be nice. But I don't know. It's cool. You can build around it a little bit. It's not terrible. Slither. You are an expert at moving through extremely tight spaces. You gain the quick squeeze skill feat, even if you're not trained in acrobatics. When you roll a success on an acrobatics check to squeeze, you get a critical success instead. That's alright. It's pretty cool. Squeezing doesn't come up often, but when it does, it's cool. But having a whole feat dedicated to just squeezing is, maybe not great. And the last one is Snare Setter. Prerequisites: trained in crafting. And this still hasn't been errated yet. This feat needs to get fixed because you have to be trained in crafting. You are adept in the time-honored kobold art of trap making. You gain the trained proficiency in crafting, but you had to have it in the first place before taking this. What the fuck? If you are already trained in crafting, which you had to have been to get this, you instead become trained in a skill of your choice. You gain access to all uncommon kobold snares, which they've only just recently, even though this feat has been in the game for 2 years almost now, they've just recently actually made some kobold snares, I think. Like 1 or 2. We need a lot more. You gain the snare crafting feat, though when choosing your formulas for that feat, you can also choose from uncommon kobold snares, as well as common snares. It's a super cool, it's like as much as some of these other things are thematic, this really is like more social dynamically thematic, because it's like, oh, kobolds are good at this. The rest of this stuff is more like biological, whereas this is more social, which I like those kind of things. But that is all for this one. We will continue on, maybe finish the rest of these in the next video. Until then, good night.